You know what hurts more than physical pain? It's when someone you shared childhood memories with, someone who stood beside you in every family photo, becomes the person who erases you from your own history without blinking. Have you ever wondered how far someone you love would go for money, for power, for validation? I used to think I was too cautious, too forgiving, too family-oriented to ever face a betrayal like that, but I was wrong. Before we dive in, if you've ever been pushed aside by someone who claimed to love you or felt invisible inside your own family, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment with your city and local time. I want to know where you're listening from. Now, let's listen to my story journey. It began with a voicemail, just 28 seconds long. A clipped professional voice that said my father's estate had been fully executed and closed. That was strange because I hadn't signed anything. I remember I was unloading groceries when the message came in. It played on speaker as I wrestled with a carton of eggs, half listening until I heard the name Howard Green, my father. And then, we're calling to confirm that the probate process has been finalized and assets distributed per the signed documents. My hand froze midair. Signed documents? I hadn't signed a damn thing. I set the eggs on the counter and hit play again, letting the words scrape against something raw in my chest. It didn't make sense. I'd been expecting a meeting with the estate attorney for weeks. When I called after the funeral, they said the paperwork was still being reviewed. And now this? I called back immediately, but the office was closed for the weekend. I left a message, but my voice cracked halfway through, and I ended up hanging up before I could even leave my number. My hands were shaking. I told myself it had to be a clerical error, but I knew better. My older brother, Colin, had always been persuasive. He could turn a no into a yes with a smile. He was the firstborn, the prodigal son, the one Dad always turned to when things got serious. Growing up, he was the storm, and I was the cleanup crew. He'd break things, rules, curfews, hearts, and I'd patch them up, apologize on his behalf, smooth over the cracks. Still, I never thought he'd go this far. That night, I barely slept. I kept playing scenarios in my head. Maybe Colin had gone ahead and started the paperwork early. Maybe there was a clause I didn't understand. Maybe Dad left everything to him, and I just hadn't wanted to believe it. But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that this wasn't just about inheritance. It was about erasure. About being scrubbed out of the narrative like I never mattered. On Monday morning, I called the law office the minute their lines opened. The receptionist put me on hold, and then a man named Peter Hensley came on the line. I recognized his voice from the funeral, the tall man with the pale tie who had shaken my hand too tightly. "Yes, Ms. Green," he said. "Everything was processed according to the agreement signed 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks ago? I asked. "What agreement?" There was a pause. "The waiver you submitted. It relinquished your claim to the estate. It was notarized." My breath caught. I didn't sign anything. Another pause. Longer, heavier. "It was submitted electronically, with your name, your digital signature." "No," I said. "That wasn't me." Peter cleared his throat. "This may be something we need to look into further." I knew in that moment, before any proof, before any investigations, that it was Colin. It had his fingerprints all over it. That calm confidence that the rules didn't apply to him. That people could be talked into anything, or out of everything. I hung up the phone and stared at the framed photo on my kitchen counter. Me, Colin, and our father on the front steps of the old house. It had been taken 3 weeks before Dad's heart attack. We all looked like a family then. But I saw it now. The distance in Colin's eyes. The glint of something cold behind his smile. I wasn't going to let this go. It's funny how memory can change when you look back at it through the lens of betrayal. Things you once brushed off as quirks or harmless favoritism suddenly feel like early warnings you chose not to see. Colin and I were born 3 years apart. He was the first to walk, the first to speak, the first to win a spelling bee and smash a car. Our parents were proud of both of us, or so they said. But there was always a different glow when they looked at him, especially Dad. Our mother passed away when I was 9, and after that, Dad poured everything he had into raising us alone. But even then, the split was obvious. Dad taught Colin how to drive, how to negotiate a used car price, how to shoot pool and fix a leaky sink. With me, it was different. He loved me, sure, but from a distance. Our bond was quieter, built on polite questions and brief check-ins. I learned early not to need too much. Colin, though, he was lightning in a bottle, charismatic, reckless, always in the middle of something exciting or disastrous. He'd talk himself out of tickets, into promotions, through breakups, and back into relationships. He made people feel like they were the most important person in the room, until they weren't. I once watched him charm a neighbor into loaning him a car after wrecking his own, then disappear for 3 days without a thank you. When I confronted him, he laughed and said, "That's what charm is for, little sis. Use it or get used." He called me little sis, even when I was taller than him. Even when I graduated college and he dropped out. Even when I paid off my student loans while he defaulted and moved back in with Dad. For years, I played the part of the responsible sibling, the quiet achiever, the one who never made trouble, who stayed close to home, who called Dad every Sunday and brought groceries over when he started forgetting small things. I told myself it was my choice, that I was being dutiful, not desperate for approval. But deep down, I was always waiting for the moment when Dad would finally see me. Not as the backup plan, not as the one who cleaned up the messes, but as his equal, his daughter. It never came. Dad never rewrote the will, never sat us down to say, "This is how I want things handled." He was old school and maybe a little naive. He believed in family loyalty, in blood ties that didn't need to be spelled out on paper. I don't think it even occurred to him that Colin would betray that, but I should have seen it coming. The first clue had arrived months earlier, though I hadn't realized it then. A strange text from Colin that read, "Hey, don't worry about the lawyer stuff. I'll take care of it. You're busy with work, right?" I remembered pausing, wondering why he was so eager to handle it. I'd shrugged it off, thinking he was just being his usual controlling self. I hadn't followed up. I hadn't pressed. And now I was here, trying to untangle something that had been in motion long before that voicemail ever landed in my inbox. I sat on the floor of my apartment that night, surrounded by old photo albums. I flipped through images of birthdays and beach trips, Christmas mornings and Halloween costumes. And in almost every one, Colin had this look, chin high, eyes glinting, always in the center. I was usually off to the side, smiling but small. What kind of person do you have to be to erase your own sister? To forge her name, take what was hers, and walk away like it meant nothing? That weekend, I called my aunt, Dad's sister, and asked if she'd heard from Colin. She hesitated. "He's in Arizona, I think." He texted after the funeral, said he needed space. Did he mention the estate? A pause. Only that it was handled. Why? Is something wrong? I didn't answer. I was tired of being the one who explained. Everywhere I turned, I found silence. People who knew something but didn't want to get involved. People who loved Colin's charm more than they valued the truth. People who said things like, "He's family," as if that word was enough to justify anything. It wasn't. The next morning, I emailed the estate attorney a formal request for all documentation. I wanted to see the waiver with my so-called signature. I wanted to see dates, timestamps, notary stamps. I wanted every scrap of paper that had been used to cut me out. And then I called the one person who might be willing to tell me the truth. Her name was Elise, Colin's wife. Technically, still his wife, though they'd been separated for almost a year. She picked up on the second ring, her voice weary. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," she said. I blinked. "What?" "I got something for you," she said, low and bitter. Something he didn't mean to leave behind. I met Elise at a coffee shop just off the highway. A quiet place tucked between a used bookstore and an old laundromat. She'd chosen the spot. Neutral ground, she said. Somewhere Colin had never stepped foot. She was already sitting when I arrived. hair pulled into a messy bun, fingers wrapped tightly around a ceramic mug. Her eyes were tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from years of disappointment that had hardened into something more brittle than grief. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I almost didn't," I admitted. But then I realized he probably thinks we never talk, that we'd both just let this go. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah, that sounds like him." We didn't exchange pleasantries. No, "How have you been?" or "How's work?" It wasn't that kind of meeting. She slid a manila folder across the table before I could even order a drink. "What's this?" "Everything I could find," she said. Printouts, screenshots. He left a backup drive behind when he moved out. I guess he didn't think I'd ever look at it. I opened the folder slowly, heart pounding. The first page was a PDF printout of an email from Peter Hensley, the estate lawyer, addressed to Colin. The subject line read, "Waiver submitted successfully." The body confirmed receipt of the digital documents and said that distribution would begin immediately. Attached to the email was a scanned PDF of the waiver I had allegedly signed. My name was typed neatly at the bottom. The signature looked close enough to mine that someone might believe it, but it wasn't. I'd never signed that. And I sure as hell never authorized anyone to sign on my behalf. "What the hell?" I whispered, flipping through the next few pages. They were bank statements. Transfers from the estate account into 2 new ones, both under Colin's name, one domestic, one offshore. Elise pointed to a line item near the bottom. "That account? It's in Belize. He opened it 6 weeks before your dad passed." My mouth went dry. "He was planning this." She nodded, her lips pressed in a tight line. "For months, maybe longer." I looked up at her, trying to read her face. "Why are you giving this to me?" Her expression didn't soften, but her voice did. "Because I've been where you are now, looking at someone I thought I knew, realizing I didn't know him at all." She glanced out the window, blinking hard. The lies, the gaslighting, the excuses. At first I thought I was crazy. Then I thought maybe I deserved it. But the truth is, he doesn't feel guilt like we do. Colin's always been good at making people believe he's the victim, even when he's holding the knife. A lump rose in my throat, painful and sharp. "He took everything." Elise looked back at me. "Not everything." She reached into her purse and pulled out a smaller envelope. This one sealed, with my name written in Colin's handwriting. "I found this last week," she said, stuffed in a shoebox full of receipts. I wasn't sure if I should open it, but it had your name on it. I figured that was your choice. I hesitated, then took the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. No greeting, just a date and a beginning. I know I probably won't be forgiven, but I wanted someone to know why. I stared at it, hands trembling. "I haven't read the whole thing," Elise said. "Didn't feel right. But whatever's in there, I hope it gives you something close to peace. Or at least clarity." We sat in silence for a long moment, the folder and envelope between us like artifacts from a crime scene. She finally stood, leaving a few dollars on the table. "You deserve better than what he left you with," she said before walking away. We both did. I stayed in the coffee shop long after she left, reading the letter once, then again, barely able to process what I was seeing. Colin hadn't just stolen the money, he'd rewritten the story, painted me as unstable, absent, uninterested in the estate, claimed I'd asked him to handle everything, that I'd wanted no part of the family's money because I was building a new life. It was a masterclass in manipulation. But one line stood out from the rest, scribbled messily in the middle of the page, almost like a note to himself. "She'll find it eventually. If she does, tell her I tried. I really did." What the hell did that mean? I flipped back to the documents, scanning the pages Elise had given me. That's when I noticed a sticky note nearly buried in the stack. It was an address, scribbled in Colin's messy, slanted handwriting. No explanation. Just a location and a date, 4 days from now. I stared at it, heart pounding. It was time to stop cleaning up his messes. This time, I was going to find him, or what was left of him. The address on the sticky note led to a remote cabin in the northern part of the state, about 2 hours from where I lived. It was the kind of place you didn't stumble upon. It had to be chosen, hidden on purpose. I drove up alone, taking my old sedan through winding back roads that grew narrower and more uneven the farther I went. The GPS lost signal 15 miles out, and I relied on printed directions after that. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I wasn't even sure what I was hoping to find. By the time I pulled into the gravel clearing and saw the dark green cabin nestled between pines, my hands were slick on the steering wheel. It looked abandoned. The windows were dark. The porch sagged slightly and one shutter flapped loose in the wind. I killed the engine and sat there for a long moment, the sound of my own breathing loud in the silence. I knocked first. Out of habit, maybe. Then again, louder. No answer. The door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled like damp wood and stale air. The cabin was sparsely furnished. A dusty couch, a chipped coffee table, a small kitchenette with a half-stocked pantry. It didn't look like anyone had lived here recently, but it also didn't feel completely untouched. There were footprints in the dust. A half-burned candle on the table. Someone had been here. I found the journal in the bedroom closet, tucked in a shoebox under a pile of old coats. Alongside it were several flash drives and a second envelope, this one marked with my name again. The journal was Colin's. His handwriting, unmistakably erratic and slanted. The first few pages were ramblings, half-thoughts, scrawled lines of guilt and bitterness. But then, as I flipped further, the entries became more structured. One date caught my eye. The day after our father's funeral. She looked right through me, like I'd already betrayed her. Maybe I had. But what was I supposed to do? He left everything in my name. Said I was the one who'd protect the family legacy. I told Elise not to worry. I told myself it was for the best. But now I'm not so sure. My stomach turned. Dad left everything in his name? I scanned the next few pages. More fragments, more justifications. Colin trying to convince himself that what he'd done was fair. That I wouldn't understand, that I didn't care enough about the family business or the weight of carrying Dad's expectations. Then, further in, a confession. I forged her name. I did it. Told Peter it was a digital signature. I just wanted to get it over with before she started asking questions. It felt wrong, but not as wrong as it should have. There it was, the truth, in his own words. Not just suspicion or paper trails, but a written admission. I sat on the floor of that cold cabin, reading every last page. Elise had been right. Colin had done it all. He'd rewritten the will with the help of a shady lawyer friend, claimed power of attorney documents that never existed, forged signatures, redirected funds. He'd cleaned out accounts, closed down what little remained of our father's estate, and left town before I could even realize the rug was gone from under me. But the part that surprised me most came at the end of the journal, where the deflection gave way to something that sounded dangerously close to remorse. I thought if I left something behind for her, it would make up for it. Not money. She's always hated how we use it to control her. But something real, something ours. That's when I remembered the envelope I'd nearly forgotten in the rush of discovery. Inside was a photograph. It was of me and Colin, maybe ages 7 and 10. We were at the lake house, Dad's old place, now sold, both soaked from the water, sitting on the dock. Colin had his arms slung around me, and we were both laughing at something unseen. On the back, in blue ink, Colin had written, "You were the only good thing I didn't deserve." It hit me harder than I expected, because for a moment, just a moment, I believed he meant it. But belief doesn't change facts. Regret doesn't undo theft. And sentiment doesn't cancel betrayal. I packed up the journal, the flash drives, the envelope, and left the cabin without looking back. I didn't know if Colin was ever coming back. I didn't know if he was watching me through the trees or hiding in some foreign country under a different name. But I knew this. I had what I needed now. Proof. And a story no lawyer could ignore. I spent the next several days in a haze of phone calls, scanned documents, and whispered explanations over poor connections. The journal pages were photographed and uploaded. The flash drives were copied and reviewed. One of them even held recordings. Voice memos Colin had made to himself, talking through each stage of the fraud like he was rehearsing a script for the world's most painful play. Each file made me feel a little colder, a little smaller, a little more certain that this wasn't a misunderstanding or momentary lapse. It was planned, methodical. He stole from me, knowing exactly what it meant. I sent everything to Peter Hensley, the estate lawyer. Then I called and left him a message. Don't call me back until you've listened to all of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was grief. The slow, seeping grief that comes not when someone dies, but when they become someone else entirely. I couldn't help but think about our last real conversation. Before Dad died, before the will, before the betrayal. We were sitting in a hospital cafeteria, drinking terrible coffee, laughing about the old stereo Dad refused to replace. You'll probably get stuck with that thing when he goes, Colin had joked. I'd rolled my eyes, only if you take the recliner. That was who we used to be. Brothers. Not partners, not enemies, not opposites. Just two kids who grew up in the same storm and thought we'd survived it together. That illusion was now shattered. 3 days later, Peter finally called me back. His voice was tight, tense. I had no idea, he said. Colin gave me power of attorney forms. They looked legit. I didn't question. You didn't verify the signature? I interrupted. You didn't call me, email me. Nothing? I'm sorry, he said. You're right. I should have. I hung up on him. What followed was weeks of legal motion. The journal, the digital trail, the forged documents, they all formed the backbone of my case. My lawyer, a sharp, unshakable woman named Neera Shah, took one look at the evidence and said flatly, he's going to lose everything. Even if we can't find him, we'll freeze the assets. Eventually, the truth will do what it always does, float. I wanted to believe that. But I also knew my brother. He had a head start. He'd buried money, moved it, possibly changed his name. Legal justice would be slow. Maybe years. And yet, even amid the legal whirlwind, another envelope arrived. This time from Elise. No return address. Just a soft linen envelope with my name handwritten across the front. Inside was a note. I thought you should know. He called, not to apologize. Just to say goodbye. He's leaving the country. Maybe forever. I didn't tell him I'd seen you, but I did say this. She deserves better than what you left her with. And he didn't argue. Attached was a photograph. It was an ultrasound image. Black and white, grainy, and unmistakable. Colin's name was printed at the top, along with Elise's. Dated 2 years prior. A pregnancy. And then I remembered. A small, sad moment at the family Christmas dinner, the year after Dad died. Elise had been quiet, barely touched her food. Colin kept hovering, nervous. No one said anything, but something had been off. They'd lost the baby. And somehow, I had never really asked. Now, that photo, faded and creased, felt like a final breadcrumb. Because at the bottom, in Elise's sharp handwriting, she'd written, "This is what he left behind. Not the money, not the lies, this." I sat with that photo for hours, because for all his planning, for all the legal manipulation and financial theft, the only legacy Colin left behind wasn't in a trust fund or offshore account. It was in broken relationships, lost opportunities, and grief that never got spoken aloud. I didn't know where he was, but I knew who he was now, and so did she. The court filings moved forward, slowly but surely. Neera filed a formal challenge to the probate decision, armed with Colin's journal, voice recordings, and the forged documents. Elise provided a sworn affidavit confirming the envelope had come from him, and the box of materials was found exactly where she said it would be. Meanwhile, I returned to work, The strange thing about grief, especially when it's over the living, is that the world around you doesn't pause. Emails still arrive. Bills still need paying. Coworkers still ask, "How was your weekend?" As if the emotional battlefield inside you isn't still smoldering. And yet, I found some comfort in routine. The copy machines hum. The smell of over-steeped break room coffee. The sound of my coworker Julia's laugh as she tried to keep her toddler from FaceTiming her boss by accident. These were the small things that made the days feel survivable. I still hadn't told my mother. Part of me didn't want to hear what she'd say. Or worse, what she wouldn't. She had always viewed Colin as Dad's heir, the favorite, the smart one. When I once mentioned to her that I thought the family treated us differently, she waved it off with a soft laugh and said, "Well, he's just more like your father." Now, that comment sat in my chest like a stone, because maybe that was true, and maybe that was the problem. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with Elise's ultrasound photo, Colin's journal, and the envelope with my name on it spread before me. I kept returning to his last line. "You were the only good thing I didn't deserve." It didn't make me forgive him, but it made me feel something unexpected, grief again, but this time for who he could have been. I remembered the version of Colin who covered for me when I snuck out in high school, who drove 4 hours just to help me move apartments in college, who once threatened to fight my ex-boyfriend for making me cry in a Waffle House parking lot. That Colin wasn't imaginary. He had existed, but somewhere along the way, maybe after Dad's first heart attack, maybe after years of pressure to carry the family legacy, he'd become someone else, someone who measured love in dollars, someone who saw fairness as weakness. The day I finally met with Elise face to face, it was raining. A slow, steady spring rain that made the city feel quieter than usual. We sat across from each other in a small cafe, hands wrapped around warm mugs, unsure how to begin. She looked tired but clear-eyed. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, her wedding ring gone. "I didn't know how else to help you," she said, breaking the silence. "But I couldn't keep that box anymore. I couldn't live in a house with secrets literally stuffed behind the walls." "I'm glad you didn't," I said. "You could have thrown it all away. You didn't owe me anything." "No," she said, "but he did." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain drum against the windows. "He called from some burner number," she continued. "Didn't say where he was, just that he needed time. I told him he was a coward." That word, coward, hit hard. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was the first time someone had said it aloud. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course." "Did he love you? Like, really love you?" She looked down at her coffee. "Yes, I think he did. But he didn't know how to love without control. Everything had strings, even affection." I nodded slowly. I knew that kind of love. It ran in our bloodline. When I got back home that night, I wrote Colin a letter. Not to send, just to write. It said everything I didn't say at the funeral. Everything I never said when I found out he'd betrayed me. Everything I wished I'd said before he vanished. I told him I hated him, that I missed him, that I'd chosen to fight for what was mine. Not out of vengeance, but out of self-respect. That he broke something in me that might never fully heal. And that I hoped, wherever he was, he'd find a way to stop running. I folded it once, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. Some things don't need to be mailed. Some things just need to be said. 3 months into the legal battle, Nira called me with a voice like flint. "We found something," she said. "You'll want to come in for this." I sat across from her conference table, the usual manila folders replaced by a slim, silver laptop. She turned it toward me and pressed play on a grainy surveillance clip. It showed a man, hooded, shoulders hunched, but unmistakably Colin, at a small regional bank 2 states away, withdrawing a large sum in cash. He used a joint account under a corporate name that had never appeared in our father's estate documents. "That's him," I said softly. "Confirmed," Nira replied. The bank flagged it when we froze the estate-linked accounts. He was sloppy, maybe desperate. It was the first time I'd seen his face since all of this began. He looked thinner, nervous, a shadow of the man who used to toss me a beer on the back porch and ask if I still liked that awful indie band. But he didn't look sorry. He looked like a man trying not to be seen. With the surveillance footage and the metadata from Elise's digital evidence, Nira filed a motion to seize several secondary shell corporations Colin had used. One had a name disturbingly close to our father's business, just slightly misspelled. The kind of trick that might slip past a grieving sibling trying to untangle probate paperwork. He'd set this up long before Dad died. I felt sick. It wasn't just fraud. It was premeditated. He'd watched me grieve, held my hand at the wake, shared a toast to Dad's legacy. At the memorial dinner, knowing the whole time that legacy had already been stolen. That night, I sat on my fire escape with a beer and stared out at the city. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the money or the memories. Then my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it ring, but something told me to answer. Hello? A woman's voice, low and hesitant. Is this Jenna Ward? Yes. This is Leah Barrett. Was Colin's accountant. My heart caught in my throat. Why are you calling me? There was a pause. Because I want to come clean. And because he disappeared without paying me, I kept records, backup copies. I didn't know what he was doing at first, but once I did, I didn't know how to get out. I met her the next day. She was everything Elise wasn't. Polished, nervous, transactional, but she had a laptop full of QuickBooks records, wire transfers, and ghost invoices that filled in the gaps we hadn't yet uncovered. Colin had moved almost $500,000 over 18 months, gradually shifting funds from the estate into accounts under various business aliases. He'd even made small reimbursement payments to himself from a nonprofit Dad had once supported. He said it was temporary, Leah whispered, guilt in her throat, that he was fixing a tax mistake, that he'd put it all back. He never did, I said flatly. No, she admitted, he didn't. The next court date hit harder. Not because it was louder or more dramatic, but because this time, I didn't feel powerless. Nira presented the full trail. Forged signatures, shadow accounts, Colin's journal excerpts, Leah's testimony, and Elise's photos of the stash behind the drywall. The judge called it a textbook case of calculated breach of fiduciary duty. The trust was unfrozen. My share, while diminished, was restored. Colin's remaining assets were ordered to be liquidated, but there was no sign of him. The judge issued a bench warrant, a formal declaration of wrongdoing, a flag on his passport, but the man himself was a ghost. I walked out of that courtroom both victorious and hollow, because this wasn't the ending I wanted. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my brother back. The one who snuck candy into our bunk beds during summer blackouts. The one who carved our initials into the sycamore tree by the lake. The one who once pulled me out of a frozen pond and never told our parents. That brother was gone. And what remained was a trail of theft, betrayal, and silence. Still, in all that wreckage, something had shifted. I'd stood up, not just legally, but emotionally. I'd refused to be small. I'd stopped apologizing for asking what I deserved. I'd stopped whispering around my own needs. I wasn't done healing. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid to start. The court case was over, but the aftermath wasn't. Justice, I learned, didn't bring peace. Not right away. Sometimes it just clears the fog so you can finally see the wreckage you've been standing in. I still check my inbox every morning for messages from Colin. There were none. I kept his number saved, not because I expected him to call, but because I couldn't quite delete him yet. Every time my phone rang with an unknown number, a small part of me hoped it was him, ready to explain, to apologize, to at least try. But hope, like grief, has sharp edges. Elise reached out again a month later. She'd had the baby, a boy, healthy, born in early May after a long labor and an emergency C-section. She named him Jacob Colin Hayes. Not to honor him, she said when she sent me a photo, but to remember where we come from. And to teach my son who not to become. I stared at the picture for a long time. The baby was swaddled in pale blue, sleeping with one fist tucked under his chin. He looked peaceful, clean, untouched by the weight of the lies that had preceded him. But blood carries memory in quiet ways. And I knew Elise was right. It would be up to her and the people she trusted to raise that boy into something better than the man who'd left them both behind. She asked if I wanted to meet him. I said yes. We met at a botanical garden halfway between our cities. It was spring. The trees were budding. Tulips rose like chalices from the soil, vibrant and full of defiant life. It felt symbolic in the most unexpected way. Jacob slept through our entire visit. Elise pushed him in a stroller while we walked slowly along the paths, talking about everything and nothing. When we reached the rose garden, she stopped and turned to me. I debated giving you this, she said, pulling a small leather-bound book from her bag. It was worn, the kind of soft that only comes from years of handling. At first, I thought it was another of Colin's journals. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't. It was mine, my childhood diary. I recognized my looping handwriting, the cartoon heart stickers. The lock I used to think actually kept it safe. I stared at her, stunned. How? I found it in Colin's office, she said quietly, tucked in a drawer. He must have taken it from your parents' attic years ago. I thumbed through the pages. The entries were raw and silly and pure. Crushes. Fights with friends. One page read, Dad yelled at me again. Said Colin's the only one with a future. I wish I could disappear. My throat tightened. I didn't remember writing that, but I remembered the feeling. Why would he keep this? I asked aloud. Elise didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was soft. Maybe because deep down, he knew what he took from you, and he couldn't face it. That night, I sat on my couch with the diary in my lap. I reread it cover to cover. Every ridiculous, heartbreaking, hopeful entry. And when I reached the last page, I wrote something new. I survived you. It wasn't just for Colin. It was for my father. For the family gatherings where I shrunk myself. For the years I spent trying to be palatable instead of powerful. The money would help, yes. But it wasn't the healing. The healing was claiming the parts of myself they never saw and never asked about. A week later, I received a letter. No return address. Postmarked from New Mexico. Inside was a postcard with a photo of a desert sunrise and 4 words in Colin's handwriting. I'm sorry. Too late? There was no name, no signature, just that question. I read it a dozen times. Then I set it on fire. Not out of rage, but release. He didn't get to decide when he was ready to face the truth. Not anymore. I'd already chosen to move forward. Without him. It's strange what we carry with us when the dust finally settles. You'd think it would be anger, or grief maybe. But what surprised me most was how much space opened up inside me when I stopped holding out for an apology that might never come. A year passed. Then another. I moved to a smaller apartment, just mine, no ghosts. I planted succulents on the windowsill, bought a used piano, and started playing again. Badly, at first, then with growing confidence. I hadn't touched keys since childhood, when Colin used to tease me for missing notes. He was gone, but I was still here. Elise and I stayed in touch, not close like sisters, but something adjacent, like war buddies. Occasionally, she'd send me photos of Jacob. First tooth, first steps, and a crooked birthday cake with toy trucks smashed into frosting. In each picture, he looked more like her. I found comfort in that. Dad's business was eventually sold, the funds split in a new trust I now manage myself. It didn't make me rich, but it gave me options. I left the marketing firm and opened a small creative agency that focused on nonprofit clients. Work that felt like something. One autumn afternoon, Elise mailed me a package. No note this time. Just a cardboard box with my name on it, and inside, a single manila envelope. It contained the last piece of Colin, His final journal. Unlike the earlier ones Elise had shared, this one was dated after his disappearance. The entries were less frequent, more erratic. There were notes about border towns, a job at a truck stop, then a possible move to South America. No addresses, no names, just lines like, "I think about her more than I should. She was always smarter than me. I hated that. Maybe she's better off." And then, on the last page, "I stole her future, but maybe she'll take it back anyway." I closed the journal and stared out my window. The sun was setting, low and amber across the skyline, catching on the glass and steel of a city that didn't know my name and didn't care. And somehow, that felt okay. There are things we never get back. Time, trust, a certain kind of innocence. But there are also things we learn to claim for ourselves. Peace, agency, a life that is no longer borrowed from anyone else's shadow. I mailed the journal back to Elise. I didn't need it. I had my own story now. One built not on stolen inheritance, but on chosen truth. On self-respect carved out of silence. On the quiet revenge of rebuilding without bitterness. Colin's name never resurfaced in court. He remained a ghost, a whisper, a wound healing over with a scar I stopped tracing every morning. But sometimes I still think of that last line. Maybe she'll take it back anyway. I did. And I'm still taking more. Each day I wake up and choose myself. So if you're listening to this and you've been betrayed by someone who was supposed to love you, if you've been left to clean up someone else's mess, to stitch yourself back together without a map, let me say this. You are not broken. You are rebuilding. And what you create from the ashes may not look like what you lost. It might just be better. Thank you for walking through my story with me. If it stirred something in you, I invite you to share your own truth in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear it. And remember, sometimes the things we leave behind are the things that set us free.